The morning light in Jeju was soft, almost hesitant, as if afraid to disturb the silence that hung between the sea and the sky. Mist curled over the water like the breath of a sleeping giant. Through the pale veil of dawn, a woman sat alone by a window. Her hair was tied loosely, her hands wrapped around a cup of green tea that had long since gone cold. The waves moved in slow rhythm. Impatient. To the world, Sun Yejin was perfection. The woman who smiled on red carpets. The actress who could make millions cry with a single glance. The lover who had found her fairy tale ending. But on that quiet morning in Jeju, she wasn't an actress, nor a symbol of romance. She was just a woman trying to remember who she was before the applause, before the lights, before everything blurred into a dream that no longer felt like hers. "I almost gave up," she whispered, her voice trembling between honesty and peace. The words hung in the air like a confession, fragile, but freeing. The island had always been her refuge. Years ago, before she was Sun Yejin, the nation's first love, she had come here with friends, laughing in the rain and chasing waves with bare feet. Now she returned alone, carrying not laughter but the quiet ache of someone who had lived too long inside an image. She had thought love would be her escape. When she met Hyun Bin, like the universe had folded itself to bring them together, two stars colliding in perfect symmetry. Their story on screen had made the world believe in fate again. Behind the camera, behind the photos that went viral, there was a different kind of story, one where love was tested not by distance, but by the weight of being watched. After crash landing on you, every step they took became news. Every gesture, every silence, every ring that appeared on her finger became a headline. The world saw the smiles, the romantic glances, the laughter. What they didn't see were the nights she sat in darkness, her phone lighting up with thousands of messages, some loving, some cruel. People saw the smile, not the exhaustion. She once said quietly during an interview. She had laughed it off then, but the words had roots. They came back to her now, as the sea whispered its endless rhythm outside her window. The pressure of perfection had crept in slowly, disguised as love, duty, gratitude. She was grateful for the fans, for the success, for the man who stood beside her in storms. But gratitude sometimes became guilt, guilt for a feeling tired, for not being endlessly radiant, for not living up to the myth people had written for her. And then there was the silence, the long, heavy silence between her and Hyun Bin when words became too sharp, too dangerous. It wasn't a fight in the dramatic sense. No shouting, no slammed doors. Just an invisible wall, built brick by brick from misunderstandings, fatigue, and the weight of trying too hard to be perfect. He didn't say a word. Neither did I. But the silence was louder than any fight. She recalled later. That night, she had packed a small bag out on the kitchen table and taken the last flight to Jeju. She didn't tell anyone, not her manager, not her friends, not even him. She just needed to breathe. Jeju welcomed her not with comfort, but with truth. The air was colder than she remembered. The ocean felt wider. There was no camera to catch her tears as she stood barefoot on the sand of Hyeopji Beach, the wind stinging her face. For the first time in years, she let herself cry, ugly, uncontrollable tears that left her shaking. She cried for the girl she used to be, for the love that scared her, the version of herself she had lost somewhere along the way. Days passed in a blur of gray skies and gentle waves. She rented a small house near the cliffs, with wooden floors and wide windows that faced the sea. She woke with the sunrise, made coffee, and wrote in a notebook she bought at the airport. At first, the pages were filled with questions. Why am I tired? Why can't I feel happy? What does love mean if it hurts this much? But slowly, her words began to change. Questions turned into reflections. Reflections into gratitude. She started to notice small things, the way the morning light touched the curtains, the sound of children laughing in the distance, the rhythm of her own breathing. One afternoon, she met an elderly woman at a small tea house near Halim. The woman didn't recognize her. They talked about the weather, the sea, the loneliness of island life. When Yejin confessed she was trying to find herself again, she smiled gently and said, "The sea never loses itself. It just changes with the wind." Those words stayed with her. That night, she opened her notebook and wrote, "Maybe love isn't about perfection. Maybe it's about staying when everything feels imperfect. For the first time, she felt something shift inside, a quiet acceptance. She walked along the rocky shore, collecting shells and fragments of coral. She cooked her own meals, watched the stars. Let the wind undo the knots in her heart. She remembered the first time Hyunbin had told her he loved her. It wasn't in a grand, cinematic moment. It was late at night. After a long day of filming, they had been sitting in silence, exhausted. When he simply said, "You look tired. I'll drive you home." It wasn't the words, it was the way he said it. Like her exhaustion was something sacred he wanted to protect. Now, as she sat on the same kind of quiet night in Jeju, she wondered when they had stopped speaking that language. Love had become a performance, beautiful, but rehearsed. And yet, somewhere deep down, she knew it was still there, waiting for her to return to it honestly. The sky was bleeding orange when her phone buzzed. A message from him. Just 5 words. "Come home when you're ready." No blame. No pleading. Just patience. She looked out at the horizon. The sun melting into the sea. For the first time in months, she smiled, not the kind that cameras loved, but the kind that comes from a place that finally understands. Whispered to herself. Not yet, but soon. And as the wind carried her voice away, you seemed to sigh with her, as if the island itself knew that healing had begun. The winter air in Seoul carried a different kind of chill, one that wasn't born from wind, but from the quiet space between hearts trying to find their way back to each other. The city glowed that evening, spilling light gold across the Han River. From the car window, Sun Yujin watched the streets blur past, her reflection in the glass flickering between the woman she used to be and the one she was becoming. When she arrived at their house, everything looked exactly the same, the soft white curtains, the faint scent of jasmine from the diffuser she'd chosen months ago, framed photographs on the hallway wall. But the air felt heavier, as though the rooms themselves had been holding their breath in her absence. Hyunbin was in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, cooking something simple, kimchi stew, her favorite. He turned when he heard the door close. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Time stretched thin, fragile as glass. Then he smiled. And uncertain. "You're back." Those 2 words were all it took. Her eyes burned. The lump in her throat rose before she could stop it. Unable to answer, her hands trembling as she set her bag down. He didn't rush to her. He didn't ask questions. Simply reached out and brushed a strand of hair from her face. Touch warm, steady. Dinner was quiet but peaceful. He talked about small things, the new tree he planted in the backyard, a new script he was reading. Their cat had started sleeping in her chair as if guarding it. She listened, half smiling, letting his voice wash over her like rain after a drought. Later that night, they sat on the balcony, wrapped in blankets. The city sprawled below like an ocean of stars. She could feel the hum of life around them, the faint music from a distant apartment, the sound of wind brushing against a railing, faint rhythm of his breathing beside her. "I thought about leaving for good," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. He didn't turn. He just stared out into the city, fingers tightening slightly around the edge of the blanket. "I know," he said quietly. "I could feel it even when you were here." Silence stretched between them. But it wasn't the same silence as before. This one was soft, forgiving, like the pause between heartbeats. "Wasn't running from you," she continued. "I was running from the person I became. Everyone saw us as perfect. I started believing I had to be." He nodded slowly, eyes glinting in the dim light. "Have to be perfect for me." She laughed softly, tears catching the edges of her voice. "That's the thing. You always made me feel safe enough not to be, but I forgot how to feel safe with myself." He turned to her then, his gaze steady, grounding. "You found it again, didn't you? On Jeju." Down, a faint smile crossing her lips. "Maybe. Or maybe Jeju just reminded me that peace isn't a place, it's a choice." For a long time, neither of them spoke. Wind tugged gently at her hair. Somewhere below, a dog barked, and a car passed with its headlights like a fleeting memory. When he finally spoke again, his voice was softer than the night itself. "Do you regret it? Leaving?" She shook her head. "No. Sometimes love needs distance to breathe." He reached for her hand, his fingers tracing the lines of her palm as though memorizing them all over again. Then maybe this is what love really is, he said. Not the fireworks. Not the perfect picture. Just staying. Even when it's hard to stay. Slipped down her cheeks. Silent and uninvited. She didn't hide them. He didn't wipe them away. Just sat there. Letting the quiet do what words couldn't. The next morning, sunlight poured through the kitchen windows, soft and golden. She stood barefoot on the tiles, making coffee while Hyunbin flipped pancakes. It was domestic, ordinary, and yet, magical in its simplicity. Sun, still half asleep, toddled into the room. All arms wrapping around her legs. She bent down, kissing his hair. The scent of childhood filling her lungs. First time in a long while, she felt whole. The days passed, they found their rhythm again, not the rhythm of fame and schedules, but the rhythm of real life. Morning walks by the Han River. Grocery shopping disguised under baseball caps. Late night conversations that stretched into laughter. One evening, they watched old clips of Crash Landing on You. When the scene came where their characters confessed their love. Laughed softly. Do you remember how nervous you were during this take? He smiled. You were worse. Forgot your line 3 times. She nudged him playfully, and for a moment, it felt like they had gone back in time, to before everything became complicated. But this time, they weren't pretending. The love between them had grown quieter, deeper. In the everyday rather than the extraordinary. Still, there were nights when she woke up with a shadow pressing against her chest. The pressure of expectations never truly vanished, it only softened. On those nights, Hyunbin would find her sitting by the window, lost in thought. Sleep, he would ask gently. She'd shake her head. Eyes glistening in the dark. Sometimes it feels like I'm still being watched. Even when we're alone. He'd sit beside her, take her hand, and say. Then let them watch. We see what we choose to show. It was in those quiet hours that she understood something she never had before. Love doesn't save you, it reminds you that you're worth saving. He didn't save me, she wrote later in her journal. Reminded me how to save myself. The world outside continued to move, rumors, headlines, interviews, but inside their small home. Slowed. They cooked, laughed, argued, made up. They learned again that love isn't about avoiding pain, it's about holding hands through it. One Sunday morning, they took their son to a park near the river. Blossoms had begun to fall, painting the air with pink snow. Hyunbin lifted the boy onto his shoulders, and Sun Yijin watched them from a distance, the two loves of her life framed against a sky too beautiful for words. Something in her chest eased then. Like a knot coming undone. She realized that the pain she had once feared was no longer her enemy, it was proof she had lived, loved, and dared to feel everything. That evening, as the sun set over Seoul, she sat by the window again. Notebook open. She wrote slowly. Word deliberate. I almost gave up. But love waited for me, patiently. Quietly, without blame. When I was ready, it opened its arms and said, welcome home. The next morning, the first light of dawn spilled across the floorboards. Hyunbin was still asleep beside her. Their son curled between them like a promise. Outside, the city stirred awake, unaware that in one small corner of it, two people had found something rare, peace that no camera could capture. She looked at them both and whispered. More to herself than anyone else. Maybe love isn't a miracle. Maybe it's just two hearts choosing not to give up, again and again. The wind outside brushed against the windows. Soft and forgiving. Carrying away the last traces of silence. And as the city began to breathe, so did she.